I know Dave's got two other UFC-related subjects he wants to ask about, including Cain Velasquez.
So I think that the deal to me is there's a weird relationship between these two stories in the sense that they're both family oriented, vigilante, and I think that there's something in the Cain case. One of the things that they were trying to argue for Cain that I recall was that all of the years of fighting have given him, I guess what you would call beginnings of CTE, where your kind of like your senses are dulled in the sense that the kind of like what steroids do in a sense. Not that these guys aren't, but that your thought process where you would be wanting revenge, so to speak, would be also calmed down by your logic. And the idea is that when this happens to you, that thing is dulled, and therefore, when you get really mad, you don't have that thing holding you back, and then that is, in both of these cases, Lumumba Sayers, which was the other story. He was, I think, 45, 46 years old, and he was still fighting, as recently as last year, and he's been fighting for many, many, many years. Cain is not at a high level.
Well, tell everybody what happened with that story.
Okay, so Lumumba Sayers was a fighter who had fought in Strikeforce. He'd actually fought last year in bare knuckle, but he was a journeyman fighter. Never made it to UFC. He had a couple of big name fights in Strikeforce. I think Derek Brunson, Scott Smith, and Anthony Smith, which he all lost quickly.
He beat Scott Smith, actually.
He beat Scott Smith? No, I thought he lost to Scott Smith.
I'm looking at his apology record right now, unless it's wrong. But they say he submitted him. But either way, yeah. He hasn't fought a big fight in like 10 years.
Yeah. So he was so basically what happened was he was in the Dominican Republic last year. So it's almost a year ago right now, and training with a boxer for a heavyweight champ, or for a championship fight. It wasn't heavyweight, but and while that was happening, somebody shot at his daughter, and his son basically tried to save his daughter, and his son was also shot but killed. His daughter was not killed in a situation, and both of them, the father and the son, had both been working very, very hard against violence and things like that. They'd worked very hard. He'd opened up a gym trying to keep kids off the street and things like that, and so his son was killed, and his daughter was shot, and he went into a major depression, as anyone would in a situation like that. And this past week, there was a birthday party for someone. So there was somebody who was arrested for Watson, who was the guy who got killed was not the guy who was arrested. There was a guy who got arrested, and then he was let off. He still has charges facing him, but he was let off on the murder charge. I guess they didn't have enough evidence or whatever, but he still is facing charges. One of his friends his 5-year-old had a birthday party at a park, with all the friends and everything like that. And Sayers went to the birthday party and shot the guy in the head 3 times and killed him. And, it's in front of his 5-year-old, in front of his 5-year-old's friends, in front of family members. And, it's weird in the sense because in both cases with Cain, he was shooting at the guy he thought did it. This was just maybe there's a connection, and maybe he thought this was the guy who actually did it. Maybe, I don't know. He was not the guy that was arrested for it, but technically nobody's been arrested, and he was a friend of the guy. But he just shot the guy in the head 3 times, and he's, with all those witnesses and everything like that, he's facing, probably life in prison.
I think this was after your story came out, but he appealed and wanted, because the judge gave him a $1 million cash only bond. So he appealed and he wanted that reduced, and then they listened to the victim's family and they raised it to $5 million.
Wow, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I'll send you the story. But it's just a terrible, terrible story. But yeah, I see the parallels. There's always some key differences as well. But I guess it's kind of similar to what we used to say when you would say somebody was punch drunk. That's maybe kind of the same thing. I don't know. But it's just sad. obviously there's more sympathy for someone like Cain because he was, defending his son, and there's some abuse happening there. Whereas here was just like, I mean, who knows? There's obviously more to come about the story, but just really sad. And it was a shocking story. I was surprised I hadn't heard it, but after I read your article, I read up on it as well. So
so with Cain, the basic thing was just that he pleaded no contest on Thursday, right? No, Friday. Yesterday. Yesterday morning. So there will be no trial. The trial is supposed to start in a couple of weeks, and I guess the key thing was they found when they were searching his phone, they saw that he had basically investigated like what happens to people who do stuff to the people who abuse their kids, and because of that, because he was searching it out. And he'd searched a couple of websites or whatever. He'd searched the web for a couple of different keywords, basically looking to see like what happens in the situation. They pretty much said, okay, this is premeditated.
Yeah.
And that would have been brutal if he'd got, living here, there was tremendous sympathy for him. I mean, with the general public, I don't know, like the original judge had no sympathy for him. The next judge did. But the original judge had zero sympathy for him, but as far as like the public, living here, he was considered a very sympathetic person, just kind of like the guy, the guy sexually abuses your 4-year-old son, and, you lose your cool and you try to kill him. But like the deal is that the guy was released, Ghilardi, when if he had not been released from prison right away, Cain probably wouldn't have done it. And that's what always had been the big thing here was they should have never released the guy from prison. The prosecutor said not to release him, but they did. And perhaps like Cain seeing this guy, basically he's arrested on a, whatever it was, like maybe on a Friday. I think it was on a Friday. And then I think the shooting was on a Monday. And, the thing that I remember is that Cain and his family on the Saturday went to a pro wrestling show at Mount Pleasant High. So, and fine and talking to people and everything, and he would take his kids him and his wife would take kids to wrestling. I would see him at wrestling shows. I was not at that specific show though, but so that's what ended up happening. But the unfortunate thing is he was in prison I think for 8 months, and then he finally got parole, and he did one pro wrestling match in Arizona for AAA, and he had been training guys at the gym, and
he's even cornered some fighters.
He's cornered some fighters, right?
Yeah.
And from what I heard, like he was, as far as I had heard nothing about him wanting to fight again, but I had heard that as far as he was injury free, because he hadn't been training like from before and everything like that, and he was in really good shape, and he was very, very well liked, by everyone.
UFC is like they haven't really distanced themselves from him or anything. He's in all the highlight packages. They still talk about him like.
Well, Dana was very sympathetic towards him too, publicly.
Yeah.
Dana was just like
now, but
yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard anything from Dana in the last couple of days on that subject.
Yeah.
But when the thing happened, Dana's thing was just like you always say if somebody would do that to your son, you would probably go out and kill him. Well, that's what Cain tried to do, but in both cases, when Cain shot at, he shot it and hit the wrong guy, which was part of it. And the guy who he hit, I think it was Paul Bender is his name, who was the stepfather of Ghilardi, who was the son of the woman who has the preschool or not preschool, but daycare center in Morgan Hill, I believe it, or near Morgan Hill, where they live. But that's what, he had brought it was his son's regular daycare for 2 years. And, he found out, the son told the authorities, the guy was arrested, then the guy was let right out. And, obviously the daycare center had to close. But the woman, the mother, and the guy who was shot, Paul Bender, her husband, they were in court and they were absolutely furious that they dropped, they were quoted, basically saying that this was a miscarriage of justice, that, he was able to plead because, he was facing, if he had been convicted because of the premeditation, it was mandatory life in prison, although he could have gotten and probably would have gotten parole after however many years. but the original sentence would have to be mandatory if he was convicted. And they had a really good case on him, which is why he pleaded no contest. So they dropped the mandatory. He's going to be sentenced later this year. And the feeling is, I mean, there was a lot of people who spoke and said, look, he spent 8 months, blah, blah, blah. He's been a model citizen and all that. He's never had a prior arrest. Obviously, they thought very differently. But from what we understand, he is going to, whatever the actual thing is that it was agreed he's going to have to serve some time. It's not going to be like just probation or time served. At least that's what the prosecutor said there. So as part of the deal, I mean, they've got a deal. So that was the situation there.
I guess we'll find out soon.